Okay guys, I'm back here with Illustrator. So got the pencil tool. As we did in the last clip, I've just re-enabled the defaults, which are the keep selected and edit selected paths. Okay, you can hit reset, alternatively it will go back to the defaults. Just gonna get rid and clean up with some of these palettes. I'm just gonna drag and dock this on the bottom. If it will play ball with me, looks like it's been a bit funny. I'm on this top layer, new layer, and what I need to do, I'm going to draw some text here, write some text, and show you some of the problems that you get when you're trying to work on something like that. So at the moment, I've got a fill with no stroke. Might be a good idea just to switch that around. So if I wanted to write, you can see that if I keep writing, each time I try and write, it's going to keep editing. Okay, so that would be problematic if I just wanted to hand write notes or hand draw my own thing. What it can be good for is if I wanted to, draw out shapes like we did earlier and correct them and, just kind of try and put a bit of personality into the typography and refine it until we get what we're kind of aiming for. Okay, so if you do want to be able to re-edit and you were blocking out large block type, kind of like this, then it could be a good thing. Okay. However, if I then go on to try and draw the next one, sometimes what will happen is it will actually edit the first one. It looks like it's not going to here, but obviously it would vary depending on what I'm doing, scale I'm working to, that kind of thing. Okay, so I could easily make this into a piece that I draw in roughly the sort of shapes. Sometimes it's a bit tricky trying to get sharp angles, so you have to be very sort of almost over exaggerate the sharp things, which can be a bit of a pain, and sometimes it smooths things even when you don't want it to. So you might want to use a combination of this and also kind of going in regularly and chopping up or editing using the white arrow tool, removing some of the points, smoothing it. I deliberately want it to have that kind of hand drawn or paper cut look rather than to end up looking too smooth or too refined. So I'm kind of deliberately keeping some of these elements at the moment, but I just want to take off areas where maybe it's gone a bit too far, but I don't want to remove all the personality. Okay, so final letter, again, pencil tool. So I want to decide what kind of shape I'm going to go for. Just refine that. Let's use the eyedropper. Decide whether that's going to fit. Probably isn't working, so again I can just cut in. So it can be useful for this kind of stuff, okay? But if I wanted to just write notes on it, then you can see I'm going to spend a lot of time fiddling around with some of these elements, just trying to get them right. Quite like that being turned up. Okay, I might squash it a little bit, shuffle it around. It's going to unlock the previous layer, select all, put it in the center here. Again, probably for speed purposes, I am just going to refine a couple of these points. I'm going to switch to outline mode, which allows me to see and select lines that are being a bit elusive to me. Sometimes it's a pain when you're trying to select certain objects, it's getting other bits in the way. And again, I can come in with a white arrow and just refine a couple of these points. Like I said before, I don't want to take all the personality out, but I do fundamentally want it to be legible, and I don't want too many curves working in opposition to one another. So I kind of want it to feel a little bit like it's hand drawn cut, but not have too many of these flared points on the tips like this. I'm just going to take those down a tiny bit. So there we go. I've got my basic motif. Now I want to handwrite some text below here. You know, kind of, I would switch now the pencil tool. So for the sake of working on a new layer, I'm going to switch layer. I'm going to switch this to stroke rather than fill. And I'm going to deselect those. And this allows me to now go in and just sort of edit and draw on here. So I'm going to come over here and just sort of flesh out so you can see much easier being able to write with the pen turned off, so I could just print. My printing is not very good, as you can see, sort of being a bit playful but getting it slightly wrong. I'm also slightly, as most right-handed people probably, writing slightly uphill. So we just select, we've then got control over the brushes and the stroke properties. I can start by beefing this up. I can change the caps and the corners to sort of round it all off. Sort that one, I've missed that one, sort that out in a minute. I can give it a different colour. So let's give it, tell you what, let's just deselect for a minute. Let's drag on the red. So I want to unify the sort of heartbeat with that. Use the eyedropper, pick up the line style, so that kind of almost looks a bit marker penish. Okay, I can also group all these elements and I can scale them. So sometimes there's a really good book called Hand Job, which is a bit rude, but it's a very good book on hand-drawn typography. And sometimes hand-drawn typography just adds an aspect to it that is missing conventionally in sort of printed type. You know, I use it a lot when I want to add that personal kind of touch, beat to whatever it is I'm saying. All these elements in effect could be altered. So, you know, for example, here they're slightly inclined the other way, and if I felt they were too far going backwards, I can use things like the shear tool just to sort of pull them back up. So shear tool just sort of changes the angle. Let's just deselect this one and perhaps unshear these a tiny bit and just go in, and you can do as many edits as you want to what you're working with. Likewise here, I could pull this out. A bit of a hook on the end of this, so I might put that back in. I might introduce a little bit more curve into the dynamic. Okay, so I can edit, move things around within the group, look for positioning, make sure that I'm ensuring legibility basically in most of these aspects. You can group individual letters, rotate, position them, so it's quite powerful, as you can see. So I've got my ability to change that. I've also got other things I could do to the stroke weight. I can increase it and just take it back a little bit. Okay. Other thing is that you can play around with in terms of path. Once you've got these things, you see handwriting things. Obviously, I could also take my pencil tool and perhaps try you know, kind of printing these things in lowercase, however you want. Some cartoon kind of cards, they use these little nodules on the end of the type, very much like the end of a pen when you leave it on the paper and it soaks the ink in. There's all sorts that you could do with it visually. I've just effectively scribbled around to draw them. You can also add blobs onto the end, literally on a stroke by stroke basis. The end of your strokes here, you have the ability to add arrowheads or other similar devices. So for example, on the end of here, there is a blob, and you can control where it fits and how it sits on the end and its scale. So there are lots of things that you could do with it. I'm going to take it off, but you can get the idea. Obviously it's just about sort of printing using that freehand. Other option is, let's just make a copy of this, move it down. You've got things like your stroke itself. You could add textures to your stroke, so you could use your brushes. I'm not a massive fan. I tend to make my own brushes. There are some good brushes out there, but very often I find that they bring with them other problems, issues. We could go for an italic kind of calligraphy pen effect, and then we could go in and rotate the angle, and you can see a preview of it, etc. So you could go for calligraphy. Oh, hit the wrong option there. I'll just step back. The other alternative that you have is your profile of your line. Now, these are not showing up, which is not great. Let's just try on some single lines down here. You should have a range of different options in here, right? Something wrong with my display here. It would normally display these quite accurate, but probably something to do with the screen recording. But you've normally got little thumbnails in here. So you've got different profiles, like starting and finishing with a sort of tapered stroke, or an unevenly tapered stroke, or a sort of more linear stroke but with a slight bevel on each end. You can have it taper completely one way or the other with a sort of rounded thing. You can also flip these around if the points are on the wrong end. So there's all sorts of things you can do with these kinds of profiles. Uniform is straightforward. Now my thumbnails finally show up. So I can taper like that, or I can taper like this. So, you know, that gives you more like a brush effect rather than a marker pen. So it really just depends what you want to use. Final thing that would remain for me would be to match this to these stroke properties. I've got 2 point and here I've got 5, so I probably would want this to be 5 point as well, just so it looks like it's part of the same thing. Maybe that's a bit too heavy, but I want it to sort of look tangible. Okay, so that's basic sort of control of pencil tool, sorry. Again, you can just hit reset or set it back to the defaults, but you can see when I'm printing, quite often when I'm working in things like sketchbooks or I'm designing stuff, I often like to do drivers on a separate layer. So I might literally create a new layer, usually stick it on the top, lock the other layers so I can't accidentally damage them, put in comments, and then I might take a different color. I'd normally turn off these and I'd come in and I might make notes on here and just sort of say maybe to open. You can see my graphic tablet, I think with the screen recording, it's going a bit slow, so it's not quite catching up with me. It looks a bit shabby, but I like to sort of do draw over comments like this quite often, and then I would go into the next round and maybe fix or tweak that in my design, look at ways I could compensate for that or what have you. Okay, so it's great for annotations and stuff, but it's also good when you want to make some functional stuff but you don't want a font, you want to just draw it. Pencil tool really is quite liberating compared to the pen tool very often. It just takes a bit of getting used to, really. And when you start to have control of these options, some of your initial frustrations, like trying to draw something in finding it messes it up.